Let's face it, a lot of little devils cheat on their taxes, and they didn't want agents seeing them associate with me. So it was time for me to get rid of the farm. It broke my heart, but I didn't have a choice. There was one good memory selling the farm. I had a special cart made so you could put it behind a horse instead of a sulky. It had a steel cage around it and was really secure for the kids to ride in. When the real estate woman who sold the farm for me saw it, she asked if she could buy it for her grandchildren. I said I'd think about it. I'd given her an exclusive on the farm, but when the time ran out, I told her not to worry. If she sold it, she would get her full commission. And she did sell it. At the closing, she said, "Sammy, do you remember I'd like to buy that cart?" The guy who's getting the farm said, "Doesn't that belong to me? Aren't I purchasing all the equipment?" I said, "No. If you look at the list, the cart's not there. I already gave it away." He says, "Who to?" And I said, "To this lady. It's for her grandchildren." And I told her to pick it up. I wasn't charging her anything. Now the agents are all over her, trying to find out if funny stuff was involved in the sale, if I got cash under the table or anything else. She said that there was absolutely nothing like that. She told them when her exclusivity ran out, I still paid her a full commission, and it was done on a handshake. She said the minute they walked out of her office, she was going to call me and tell me they'd been there and all the questions they asked, which she did do. As the IRS investigation continued, it became clear to Sammy that he would have to declare income on at least part of the cash he had received from Fiala. In preparation for this, he gave $50,000 to each of his two passive partners in the Plaza Suite, the Colombo Capo and the Genovese Soldier. He gave a substantial broker's commission to Garofalo. He gave $10,000 to each of his men who participated in the hit. Then his lawyer-accountant, Nicholas Gravanti, gave Sammy the wrong advice. He told Sammy that it would require time to work everything out. Sammy would declare the income the following year. That's when the tax would be paid. The IRS, meanwhile, was tracking down the original cashier's check from Fiala, tracing it to the dummy account and to the armored car company where Joseph Ingracia, Joe the check casher, picked up the cash and passed it on to Sammy. Sammy, Garofalo, and Ingracia were indicted May 24, 1985, on charges of trying to bilk the government out of taxes on a $1 million sale of a Brooklyn discotheque. Multiple counts included conspiracy to defraud the government, attempted income tax evasion, and violation of the Bank Secrecy Act, which mandated reporting any domestic currency transaction that amounted to $10,000 or more. If convicted, the three defendants each faced a maximum of 20 years in prison and fines of $530,000. Sammy was accused of secretly receiving $650,000. Garofalo was alleged to have gotten $40,000. In announcing the indictments, the U.S. attorney in Brooklyn said the case stemmed from the murder of a Brooklyn businessman, although he did not link the murder to the three defendants. Sammy then retained one of the city's leading defense lawyers, Gerald Chargle. The federal prosecutors charged that Sammy had finally paid the taxes, $300,000, simply because he knew the government was closing in on it. They also claimed that Sammy had been trying to separate himself from Fiala's murder. On the stand, Gravanti swore that he and he alone was responsible for Sammy's late payment. He had misunderstood the pertinent statutes. He had made a terrible and inexcusable mistake. In admitting this, he said he knew he was putting his accountant's certification on the line. But the truth was the truth. The prosecution immediately objected, and the judge agreed, sharply rebuking Gravanti. Ignorance of the law was no defense, particularly when as egregious as this. The judge forbade any mention that Sammy and Garofalo had alleged mob ties. It wasn't relevant to the case that the government had brought, nor was the murder of Fiala. Prosecutors were limited to saying only that he had died while the sale of the disco was taking place. When the jury adjourned for deliberations, a number of inquiries were sent out regarding Garofalo and Ingracia, who were marginal figures during the trial. "It sounds to me like they're going to get off," Shargle told Sammy. The bad news was that in Shargle's view, Sammy was going to be found guilty on some of the counts. He was resigned to his fate, but Shargle had underestimated himself. In an impassioned summation, laced with sarcasm, Shargle had described Sammy as a really smart crook. What an ingenious plot. Here he was, accused of evading taxes, which in fact he did file and pay. All right, he was a year late. It was a mistake, a bad one. But how did this happen? Because Sammy listened to presumably expert advice. He relied on it. He went to his lawyer and accountant. What, Shargle demanded of the jurors, would any of them do in similar circumstances? Would they file when their professional advisors told them to? Or would they just file whenever they felt like it, completely disregarding what has been recommended? The jury acquitted Garofalo and Ingracia and Sammy. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officials. Like Shargle, they were certain Sammy would be convicted. They were like sharks circling for the kill, Sammy said. You should have seen their faces when I walked out. Shargle noticed that Sammy wasn't jumping for joy either. What's the matter, he said. You won, you should be happy. I just lost my brother, Sammy said. He was like my right arm. It had happened the night before. Stymie, Joe D'Angelo, had been shot dead. Sammy got the call at home from Huck around 3 a.m. Huck tried to be careful on the phone, and finally Sammy said, "Just tell me what the fuck you're talking about." Then Huck said that the shooting had taken place in a bar and restaurant in Bensonhurst called Tolly's that Stymie and Sammy had bought together. "I think it's finished with Stymie," Huck said. Sammy rushed over the Verrazano Bridge. He met Huck outside Tolly's. Police were everywhere. He and Huck went to the hospital where Stymie had been taken. Stymie's wife, Karen, was there sobbing. Sammy found an ER doctor who said, "He's gone. He was DOA." Sammy insisted on seeing the body. "I could hardly recognize him," he remembered. He came out, tried to console Stymie's wife, and had Huck
Hello,
take her.
Christoph. How you doing?
Sammy spent the rest of the night putting together the story. Apparently, a young Colombo family associate, about to be proposed, stoned and drunk, had gone into a bar, the Green Lantern, not far from Tolly's. A female manager ran it for the Genovese family. She was about to close up. The Colombo associate began cursing her, demanded drinks, and ended up helping himself to the cash register before leaving. The woman knew Stymie, and in tears went to Tolly's to relate what had taken place. Stymie told her to calm down and go to her friends. They would straighten this out. As he was speaking to her, the same man, still coked up, stumbled into Tolly's. "That's him," she said. "From what I found out, Stymie got up and called this guy every name in the book and told him to get the fuck out." Within minutes, the Colombo associate returned. Stymie's back was to the door when he entered holding a 9mm. Someone yelled. As Stymie turned, the first bullet caught him in the side of his head. More bullets were pumped into him as he lay on the floor. The next night, after his acquittal on the tax evasion charges, Sammy went to Toto Orello.
Cheers.
Toto arranged a meeting with Paul Castellano, during which Sammy explained the circumstances of Stymie's death. He wanted vengeance. A few days later, Castellano held a second meeting at the house of Tommy
No.
and
Just for painting.
all the main guys are there. Me, Frankie DeChico, obviously Tom, John Gunn, Paul said. After all, from what I hear, Stymie abused this guy something awful. I could see Frankie's neck swelling. Paul, he said, this guy took out a guy we were going to make a friend of ours. He was like Sammy's brother.
Hello, Dave.
If we curse at somebody, they may have the right to kill us. So Paul backs right off and said he wanted a vote about whacking this guy, no matter what the Colombo family's position was, even if it means all-out war. I said, he's got to go. And everybody votes the same, except Jimmy Brown. He's a captain, with his garbage collections and all, but he ain't no tough guy. I guess he's there as an advisor. He said, Paul, whatever you want is okay with me.
Always, Dave, always.
And Paul said, I'm not asking you that. What I want is what you think. And Jimmy said, oh, well, you put it that way. I'm with everybody else. Paul authorizes me and Frankie to meet with the Colombo people. They have already got a strong beat from the Genovese family for what this guy did in the Green Lantern. But I have
How you
belief
doing, Dave?
that wasn't nothing compared to what happened to Stymie. So we go see Scappy, Tony Scarpati. He's a captain, but right then he's the acting boss of the Colombo. He said that they have this guy stashed away. He asked if they can't keep him alive for a while. The reason? The guy owed the family $90,000 on some deal and they wanted to collect. I was infuriated. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, that's your interest? You're putting money ahead of what happened? I'll tell you what, give me the kid. I'll pay you the 90. You'll get your 90. I want the kid and I want him alive. Carmine Persico was away at this time, so I don't know if he got involved. But maybe a week later, I got the word they ended up killing the guy themselves. Some years later, somebody talked, and the cops eventually found what was left of him buried on a beach somewhere on Staten Island. So now I only had one Luca Brasi left, Old Man Peruta. I noticed he stopped going to the track in the afternoon like he always did. I said, Joe, why don't you go out there with your son and enjoy yourself? No, he told me, Stymie ain't here no more. I'll be with you at your side until the day I die.
Did you have a good Christmas?
Chapter 12. It was all around amongst us that people with John were heavy in drugs. By 1981, the New York office of the FBI was finally geared up to mount a concerted strategic assault against the city's Cosa Nostra families. Except for the initiative of individual agents from time to time, it had been an effort that had languished for the past decade. This was largely due to a mindset at the Bureau's Washington headquarters dating back to the number-crunching days of J. Edgar Hoover and his use of statistics to get the large congressional appropriations he desired. Quantity, not quality, was what counted. The result was wholesale arrests of small-time operators running illegal card and dice games, loan sharks and bookmakers, with sentences suspended or jail time of a year or so at best. There was little interest in long-term investigations aimed at the organized crime hierarchy, where only a handful of convictions, no matter how important, might be obtained. Also, two critical law enforcement tools against Cosa Nostra had been badly underutilized.
It was quiet here as well, Dave. I think it was quiet everywhere, mate, wasn't it? For this COVID shit, you know.
RICO.
Go on, Wiggs, you alright?
The other was the Title III electronic surveillance provisions contained in an omnibus crime bill that had become federal law 2 years earlier. The problem with RICO was that the Justice Department and the FBI did not fully appreciate its ramifications, even though RICO's architect, G. Robert Blakey, a law professor at Notre Dame, tried again and again to pound home the message. And the message
Super Dave Santa got me a new airbrush.
at a systematic pattern of criminal
I
activity.
got it early though.
Any
My
two
Santa's
of
good.
30-odd specific criminal acts, murder, extortion, loan sharking, and so on, that could be
Santa's
linked
good to me.
to a particular Cosa Nostra family would allow the government, in theory, to go after that family and targeted members of it as a criminal enterprise in and of itself, with penalties far more severe than the old conspiracy laws that were relied upon in the
It was
past.
quiet, huh?
The concept was so novel that the Justice Department was hesitant to move on it. Instead, it was being used, and not often, in cases involving mob infiltration of legitimate businesses, turning them into criminal enterprises.
I'm not feeling too good for a couple of days, man. I feel a bit fucking cold or
The
something.
problem with Title III electronic surveillance, which had also been authored by Blakey, was not that the FBI lacked the most sophisticated eavesdropping devices. It was that this was the domain of the Bureau's Foreign Counterintelligence Division, which was adamant about not giving an inch to the criminal division's needs. The objection was more than territorial. In organized crime trials, the courts might force the FBI to reveal not only what technology was being used,
Wiggs, I'm getting the idea what you're on about, mate. Many of us have spoke to Terrell for
a foreign
a long
counterintelligence
time.
supervisor told his organized crime counterpart, "If you think we're giving this up for some fucking gambling case, you're fucking nuts." But in 1979, after the appointment of Judge William Webster as the FBI's new director, there was a sea change in the Bureau's culture. Blakey's incessant lobbying paid off. Using the RICO statutes, along with the increased manpower available, quality investigations, however time-consuming, were encouraged. The plan was now to document a pattern of criminal activity, connect it to a crime family, and convict the family as a criminal enterprise along with its responsible members.
Have you got screenshots, Wiggs?
The views of an agent named Jim Carlson
Who gives a shit? Where he is?
failed.
You've got screenshots here about else, mate.
Blakey had insisted that phone taps and bugs granted by a judge for probable cause were key components to the success of RICO, and Carlstrom subscribed to it totally. Meanwhile, the courts had begun handing down rulings that increasingly protected the integrity of sophisticated listening devices in criminal cases. Carlstrom, an ex-Marine officer and Vietnam veteran, and now a no-nonsense, experienced, and patient, organized crime agent in the New York office, pressed relentlessly for the creation of a special operations team devoted to physical and electronic surveillance. He wanted not only first-class technicians, but access to the latest technology and a team that was knowledgeable in the ways of Cosa Nostra that would include break-in experts and sharpshooters to cover black bag entries. And he got his way. I'm not looking for a quick fix, Carlstrom told one and all about Cosa Nostra, or some dumb gambling case. I want the top guys, the movers and shakers, and I don't care how long it takes. That was exactly how Agent Bruce Mao felt. In the renewed combat against the New York family, Mao headed up the Gambino
I've only been spraying for like 2 months.
which would be designated Squad C-16. Tall, taciturn, and reflective, the Iowa-born Mao was an Annapolis graduate trained in electrical engineering. After graduation, he was assigned to the Navy's nuclear undersea fleet and served aboard an attack submarine, one that would seek out and follow Soviet missile subs for weeks at a time during the height of the Cold War.
I guess every guy sprays when they're drunk, don't they?
It was tense and exhilarating duty. But then he was promoted and faced a death-bound future. And the truth was that engineering had lost its appeal.
Right?
He resigned his commission and joined the FBI in hopes of rediscovering some of the excitement and meaning to life that he craved. At last, his goal was achieved with the Gambino Squad. He'd previously been on organized crime duty in New York and had been as frustrated as Kallstrom. But now it was different. The targets had been upgraded. Given the opportunity, Mao had chosen to go after the Gambino family. It was precisely the sort of challenge he had been yearning for. Only the Genovese family rivaled the Gambino family in power. And at that stage of the game, the Gambinos were infinitely more mysterious. Mao would be essentially starting from scratch. He knew that the family boss was Castellano. Della Croce was the underboss, and Joe N. Gallo the consigliere. He also knew that except for Della Croce, who had spent time in prison on an income tax evasion conviction, hardly the sort of prosecution Mao envisioned, none of them had seen the inside of a cell for as long as anyone could remember. To his dismay, he discovered that there were no ongoing cases against any of the three. Months were required to recruit the personnel Mao wanted. To start compiling background on the family leadership, he assigned agents to surveil Castellano, Della Croce, and Gallo, simply to learn what their daily routine was, where they met, whom they saw. Mao had no idea how many crews were in the family or the identity of most of the captains, much less the soldiers and associates. Mao did know, however, that a Maid family member, John Gotti, was a swashbuckling neighborhood figure in Ozone Park in Queens, immediately north of JFK Airport, who operated out of the quaintly named Bergen Hunt and Fish Social Club. He knew that Gotti was the acting captain of a crew headquartered there, which had been run by the semi-retired Carmine Fatico, that Gotti did little to hide the fact that he was a connected mobster, that he was considered a celebrity on the streets of Ozone Park, and that on each 4th of July, he sponsored a huge and illegal local fireworks display without interference from the police, while his crew grilled hot dogs and hamburgers by the hundreds, and ice cream vendors were brought in to hand out free cones and pops to hordes of delighted children. It wasn't Gotti's swaggering ways or thumb-the-nose attitude toward law enforcement, however, that caused Mao, as soon as the Gambino Squad became operational, to designate Gotti his #1 target. Gotti's misfortune was that the only reliable sources of intelligence about the Gambino family that the FBI had in place at the time of Mao's arrival concerned Gotti. One of these sources was a bookmaker with close ties to the Bergen crew, who, hoping to hedge his own bets against future run-ins with the law, began reporting Gotti's obsessive sports gambling.
Aye, Kirsty. Aye, it was alright. It was quiet, eh? Just the way I like it.
Gotti was a big-time player and a big
Glad it's over with, but
he always paid his debts, not out of some moral sense, but because to do otherwise would bring about immediate dishonor in mob circles. Gotti resided in a modest Cape Cod-style house in the Howard Beach section of Queens, adjacent to Ozone Park. His sole recorded income at the time was a $25,000 annual salary as a salesman for a plumbing supply company. On a given weekend, the bookmaker confided, Gotti would lose that much or more.
How are you?
Where was the money coming from? The bookmaker suggested narcotics trafficking. Gotti's crew was heavily engaged
It was quiet, but just the way we like it.
He singled out Angelo
Hope you and the bairn had a good Christmas.
Sal, a millionaire heroin dealer, who was in fact now a
I
wanted
saw about the kids, eh?
There was Angelo himself, Gotti's brother Gene, Don Carneglia, and Anthony Tony Roach Rampino.
I'm alright.
It was all around among them, Sandy said, that people with John were heavy in drugs. Personally, I don't believe John ever did it himself. but he had to know what was going on. I mean, there's Genie, his own brother, Angie Ruggiero, who he grew up with, the other guys with him, Johnny Carneglia, Eddie Lino, and Tony Roach, who not only had a reputation for drugs, but was an ex-junkie. What I think is John just took the money and didn't ask no questions. I think that's what Paul Castellano did, probably a lot more. But Mao also had an informant far more important than the bookmaker. His name was Willie Boy Johnson. He too had grown up with John Gotti. His mother was Italian, his father a Cherokee Indian. He had love tattooed on the knuckles of one hand and hate on those of the other. When Gotti became associated with the Fatico crew, he brought Johnson along, using him as an errand boy and an enforcer to collect overdue loans.
I've still got a fair bit to do on it, eh?
Bitter because after he was jailed on a robbery conviction, Fatico failed to care for his wife and children during his incarceration. In 1971, to even the score, after an arrest for extortion, he became a source for the FBI concerning events inside the Bergen Hunt and Fish Social Club. Although on the surface, Willie Boy played the obedient Tonto to Gotti's Lone Ranger, he seemed to take special pleasure in reporting what Gotti was up to. Gotti's idea of humor left plenty to be desired, and Johnson's seized with resentment as Gotti delivered derisive asides about redskins and half-breeds, and often treated him as a second-class citizen. In return for his information, Johnson received cash payments from the FBI and operated on the assumption that if he were ever caught in criminal activity, his cooperation would be taken into account. No one tried to dissuade him on this score. He was too valuable. Willie Boy was the informant who identified Gotti as part of the hit team that murdered James McBratney, the kidnapper of Carlo Gambino's nephew. In 1979, Johnson reported that Gotti, his brother Gene, and Angelo Ruggiero had been formally made members in the Gambino family. He also reported that Gotti was Neil Delacroce's prized protege. He relayed news of Gotti's deepening anger that despite Delacroce's best efforts, Paul Castellano had thus far refused to change his status from acting to official capo of the Bergen crew. He confirmed what the bookmaker had indicated, that heroin and cocaine trafficking was rampant in the crew. He also confirmed Gotti's uncontrollable gambling and his penchant for womanizing night after night to such a degree that half the following day was gone before Gotti crawled out of bed. In 1980, a Howard Beach neighbor of Gotti's, a man named John Favara, who worked in a Long Island convertible bed factory, was driving home. Suddenly, a boy on a borrowed mini-bike darted into the street from behind a dumpster. Favara had no time to brake, and the boy was killed. He was 12-year-old Frank Gotti, apparently the apple of his father's eye. Friends of Favara's suggested that it might be wise to vacate Howard Beach permanently, and right away. Even one of Favara's parish priests cautioned him not to attend the funeral. At first, Favara shrugged off the warning. It had been a dreadful accident. It wasn't his fault, as anyone with half a brain knew. What his friends were hinting at only happened in the movies. Then he found a funeral card and a photograph of young Frank in his mailbox. A female voice phoned a death threat. The hood of his car was spray-painted with a single word: murderer. A woman, Favara later said, approached him in his driveway and struck him with a metal baseball bat. After that, Favara decided to move, but he never got the chance. On the verge of closing on the sale of his Howard Beach house, he left his factory job and walked to the parking lot of a nearby diner where he usually parked. He was intercepted by 3 males. One clubbed Favara and he was hustled into a van. That was the last anyone saw of him. The word on the streets of Howard Beach and Ozone Park was that he had been chainsawed to death. At the time, John Gotti was in Florida. Not even Willie Boy Johnson could confirm the circumstances of Favara's disappearance. There had been no discussion at all about it in the Bergen crew. Gotti, Johnson told the Gambino squad, was a rising star in the family. There were any number of men who could have abducted and killed Favara on their own in hopes of gaining his favor. But what intrigued Bruce Mao more than any of the information Johnson passed on was his almost offhand remark that because of Gotti's nightly carousing, Angelo Ruggiero had become his straw boss for the crew. If Gotti was the crew's acting captain, Johnson said, Ruggiero was the assistant acting captain, and Ruggiero ran off at the mouth to the point where behind his back he was called Quack Quack. Moreover, in Johnson's presence, he boasted that he could easily foil any FBI attempt to tap his telephone. When he wanted to talk business, he would use a princess phone that had a separate line listed in his daughter's name. Mao had been searching for a weak link to exploit, and Ruggiero provided this opportunity. The first case that the Gambino squad opened was titled 183A-1550. It was directed at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Social Club. Its designated targets were John Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero. Based on what had been thus far ascertained, Bruce Mao obtained a probable cause court-authorized wiretap on the phone of Ruggiero's daughter in November 1981. By then, Gotti had every reason to believe that being the Bergen crew's acting captain was the beginning of much greater things to come for him. As it would turn out, that Title III tap was the beginning of Gotti's undoing. It was Gotti's first misfortune that the FBI's initial sources of information about the Gambino family centered on the Bergen crew. His second misfortune was that Mao was a bachelor with no personal obligations to a wife or children, who devoted his every waking moment to the pursuit of the Gambino family in general, and John Gotti in particular. With any luck, Gotti could lead him to Della Croce and Castellano. One of Ruggiero's daily tasks was to rouse his captain by noon. As FBI tapes rolled, Gotti's groggy voice would be heard answering the phone. Yeah? John, how you doing? A grunt, a throat-clearing cough. Finally, okay, Ange, okay. Time to rise and shine, Johnny boy, okay? Ruggiero jovially coaxed. Okay, Ange, come on, okay. 15 minutes later, Ruggiero would call again to make sure Gotti was up and about. You got your coffee? Yeah, Ange. One Sunday, during a call from Ruggiero, Gotti began a litany of the losses he was facing at that very hour. I bet Buffalo 6 dimes, $6,000, and they're getting killed. I bet New England 6 dimes. I'm getting killed with New England. I bet 3 dimes on Kansas City. They're winning, but maybe they'll lose too, those motherfuckers. Ruggiero then phoned Gotti's brother, Gene. Something had to be done about John's gambling. He wouldn't listen to me, Gene Gotti said. Then, in another conversation with Gene, Ruggiero made a slip. He asked an oblique question about a heroin deal, asking if it had gone down. Yeah, Gene Gotti said without elaborating. On this initial tap, Ruggiero didn't talk on the phone about specific murders or drug trafficking. Still, the squad was compiling a wealth of intelligence about the Gambino family. Who the players were, who was in favor, who wasn't, which enabled Mao to start drawing up an all-important, accurate chart of the family organization. Ruggiero proved to be a non-stop talker and an incurable gossip. Every other Sunday, he would drive to the White House on Tote Hill to report to Castellano about the activities of the Bergen crew and the profits the boss could expect from the crew's hijacking and gambling operations. Back home, he was immediately on the phone complaining about Paul Castellano's high-handed manner, Tommy Bellotti at his side. He sneered that Castellano was a milk drinker and a pansy. He put down Castellano's two sons, who were running the Dial poultry business, as the chicken men, and called business advisors that Castellano had around him the Jew Club. Tommy Gambino, Don Carlo's son and Paul's nephew, who oversaw the family's interests in the garment center, was a sissy dressmaker. Chuckling at his own wit, he conjured up an image of Castellano and Bellotti spending their evenings together on Tote Hill, whacking off. The day would come, he boasted to crew members, when John would be the family boss and he, Angelo, the underboss. Wow, Mal thought. He could just imagine what Castellano's reaction would be if he ever heard talk like this. And perhaps he would. Mao briefly considered and discarded the idea of placing either a phone tap or a microphone in the Bergen clubhouse. Wise guys by now were alert to the fact that their social clubs had probably been wired. Any business being discussed was broached in basically unintelligible, fragmented sentences punctuated with hand signals or conducted on the street.
This ends side 2 of cassette 5 of Underboss. Please fast forward to the end before loading cassette 6. Underboss, cassette 6.
But when Ruggiero moved from his Howard Beach home in early 1982 to a new residence in suburban Cedarhurst, Long Island, the wiretap followed him. And now Jim Kallstrom's team of break-in experts and highly trained technicians installed a miniature state-of-the-art bug as well. They knew exactly where to put it. Thanks to Willie Boy Johnson and other sources developed once Gotti was targeted, Mao had learned that Ruggiero held his mob meetings in a dinette off the kitchen. The garrulous Angelo came through. A Long Island neighbor, Robert DiBernardo, the family's porno king, would drop by, and from the constant prurient questioning by Ruggiero, Mao's squad got a very clear picture of both the extent and the profitability of what the family was raking in. Mao also learned that the serious, potentially bloody rivalry supposed by conventional wisdom to exist between Neil Della Croce and Paul Castellano was very much overblown, if it existed at all. Frank DeCicco was a visitor to the dinette. Admittedly, a racketeer gangster gap existed between the boss and the underboss, and DeCicco was one of the few in the family able to move easily between the two, enjoying their mutual respect. But when Ruggiero, who was a nephew of Della Croce's, tried to convince DeCicco that his uncle had real beefs against Castellano, DeCicco wouldn't bite. To Ruggiero's unhappiness, DeCicco said that as far as he was concerned, Neil was a faithful underboss. He was old line Cosa Nostra. He knew the rules. Gene Gotti, John Carneglia, and Eddie Lino, who was yet to be made, sat at Ruggiero's dinette table. They all worked for Angelo's fugitive brother Sal, whose heroin trafficking, they told Angelo, had brought in upwards of $2 million in just one 6-month period. From the tone of these conversations, Mao deduced that Angelo himself was not then directly involved in heroin. Then, suddenly, everything changed. On May 6, 1982, almost 2 months to the day after the dinette bug was activated, Sal Ruggiero died in the crash of a chartered Learjet off the Florida coast. And Angelo, as the executor of his estate, inherited his brother's drug cartel. Now the talk about heroin became quite explicit. Gene Gotti and John Carneglia would inform Angelo that they had 5 kilos available here, 3 there. This or that had to be done. The guy has already paid, Gene Gotti once said. We owe him 2 kilos. Other suppliers and dealers who'd been part of his brother's empire would be at the Cedarhurst house, using transparent code words like pieces of furniture or mortgage payment. In his new role as a heroin trafficker, Ruggiero exhibited an uncharacteristic wariness. He not only had law enforcement to worry about, but was well aware that Paul Castellano had repeatedly declared, "You deal in drugs, you die." He brought in an ex-New York City cop to sweep his home for possible taps and bugs. As soon as Gambino's squad agents learned this, the microphone was turned off. 2 days later, after the sweep had been completed, it was activated again, and the former cop was overheard telling Ruggiero, "And I've got good news and bad news. The good news is the house is clean. The bad news is your phone's tapped." Ruggiero could barely contain his relief. "I figured that," he gushed. I knew it. Thank God I watched myself on that fucking phone. Them motherfuckers. Fuck them." Bruce Mao allowed himself a big smile. Giving up the wiretap was not much of a sacrifice. The bug was what counted. Eventually, it would provide probable cause to attempt to place a bug in Castellano's great house on the hill. One bit of intelligence gleaned from this surveillance initially surprised Mao. For all his bluster, John Gotti was deathly afraid of Castellano. When Gotti was summoned to a meeting with the boss, Mao remembered, he returned shaking like a leaf. And when one of these summonses occurred, usually out of the blue, Gotti would be ready to jump out of his skin. "Now what's going on? Am I in trouble again?" Upon reflection, though, Mao realized that Gotti had every reason to be terrified of Castellano. However tough the Bergen crew was, it was no match for the work crews that answered to Paul Castellano. For all of his desire to wrap himself in the mantle of a successful businessman, Castellano still commanded a huge army of stone killers, like Tommy Bellotti, Frank DeCicco, Roy DeMeo, Nino Gacci, a violent Irish gang called the Westies in Manhattan that Castellano used for off-the-record hits, and of course, Sammy Gravano. But at this juncture, Sammy the Bull was nowhere on Mao's radar screen. In Ruggiero's endless chit-chat about the family, he had never once mentioned Sammy. At that time, in 82-83, I was a million miles away from the Bergen crew, Sammy said. I wasn't into drugs, into hijacking, heists, bookmaking. I was in construction. John's people, Angelo, don't know nothing about construction. I knew John did a lot of hits for Paul, and he knew I did them too. But you don't talk about them. Like Todo Aurello once said, you do a hit, it's over and done with. You talk about it, and you're doing it again. And it could wind up on tape. Despite all the distractions of the Plaza Suite tax case, Sammy continued to broaden his construction interests. Besides the plumbing and drywall companies and his hardwood flooring and carpeting firm, he launched a painting company. In much the same way that the Gambino family controlled Local 282 of the Teamsters, the Lucchese family controlled District Council 9 of the International Brotherhood of Painters and Allied Trades. What I do, Sammy said, is I get Dino, who is a guy with the Lucchese people, to go and bid the painting contracts for me. Dino gets the job, and I get half the profit. And Sammy also moved into steel erection for buildings. A relatively small company, Gem Steel, was run by an entrepreneur named Joseph Polito. A decent guy, a cool guy. Polito's chief engineer was Mario Mastromarino. Mario worked in steel all his life, really a top guy in his field, recognized and respected. Me and Louis Melito know Mario for 100 years from the neighborhood, and he approaches us and asks if we could help Gem on some subcontract. And we did. He comes back and says how happy Joe Polito is, and could we help out on another job he's bidding for. So eventually, me and Louie sit down with Joe and we tell him, look, you got a couple of favors from us, and it's benefited you pretty good. You're not dealing with morons here, and every once in a while you gotta pass something back. Joe Polito was no fool. Okay, wonderful, he said. The kickbacks Sammy received for steering subcontracts to GEM, resolving union problems, were not huge, averaging $15,000 or $20,000. But Sammy was content to do everything he could to engender Gem Steel's growth. He had much grander plans down the line. Nor was that all. He would become the consultant to a fledgling concrete pouring company called Marathon. Its president, of all people, was the son of Sammy's first hit, Joe Colucci. Concrete pouring was a cash cow, and Sammy wanted in. Not a single load of concrete was poured for any contract worth more than $2 million, which is to say, every major building project in New York City, without the assent of 4 of the 5 families. Only the Bonanno family, in disgrace because of endemic heroin trafficking at the highest levels and no longer with a seat on the commission, was out of the picture. The point man was a member of the Colombo family, Ralph Scopo, who was president and business manager for the local district council of the Cement and Concrete Workers Union. And of course, there were the Teamsters. Certain concrete pouring contractors were allowed to be part of what was called the Concrete Club. Each of the families controlled one or more of these companies. It was the only way they could avoid sudden union problems or cutoffs in concrete deliveries. In return, there was a kickback of 2% for every contract over $2 million. With Sammy on board, Marathon was now in the club. Although being the new boy on the block and still small, the amount of work it could expect was then limited. The way the system worked was monopoly capitalism in its purest form. When bids were solicited for a project, the families decided which of the companies was up for the contract. Once the price had been determined, the other companies in the club were advised accordingly and instructed to put in higher bids. In Manhattan, a lion's share of concrete pouring went to 2 companies owned by a man named Edward J. Halloran. As a result, the cost of a cubic yard of poured concrete rose to $85, the highest in the nation. Ironically, Halloran also owned a hotel on Manhattan's Lexington Avenue where the Justice Department had negotiated a special rate for its attorneys and where John Gotti carried on many of his late-night trips. The reckless greed of the Concrete Club gnawed at Sammy. It was obvious, he said. If one of them gets a contract for, say, $13 million, the next thing you know, after he knows he's got it, he jacks up the whole thing before it's over to a $16 or $17 million job. Now he's increased the cost 33%. So our greed is compounded by the greed of them so-called legitimate guys. They figure the families will be happy. They're still getting their 2%, only it's more now. And where are the general contractors, the developers, the builders going to go? It's a catch-22 for them. They'll go along to the extent that it's within reason, where nobody gets really hurt, live and let live. Everything is passed on. The guy who pays in the end is the guy buying his condo and leasing prime office space. I think only one developer, Sam LaFrac, said the hell with this and went over to Jersey. But when you're just ripping them off and shaking them down that way, it gets to be another story. And eventually, that was what happened. It blew up in their faces. Sammy had witnessed similar greed with the unions. I'm in the drywall business, he said. But there was a time when there wasn't drywall, it was plastic. Understand, we use the unions as weapons. The only time we give a union an order is when a general contractor gets out of line. We don't control wages and bullshit like that. The plasterers union got to be prima donnas. They were getting like $500 a week way back. In comes drywall, sheetrock. And the plaster went down to zip. Who the fuck uses plaster anymore? Look at the dock workers. Tony Scotto was in charge of the local. He's a capo in the Gambino family only because of his father-in-law, Tough Tony, who ran it before him. He's like royalty in the family. His wife's uncle was the Mad Hatter himself, the boss of the family before Carlo. But Scotto ain't a tough guy. He lets that union go crazy. You want to unload a ship? You need 48 different people standing around giving orders at top wages. You got a guy on the dock for 1 hour? Well, you gotta pay him all day. What happened is the big shipping companies went to alternate places, to Texas, Baltimore, Jersey, Philly, you name it. Now on the concrete, I was with Paul one time and he was asking me what I thought. I told him we were pushing too far with this. It was too much of a lock. It's not 1 job, 2 jobs, 10 jobs. It's everything in the city. Every major project in the city of New York, 100% controlled by us. And the prices keep getting inflated. The bubble is going to pop. Paul was a brilliant business guy. He already foresaw a lot of these things. He was basically agreeing with me, but he was saying that 4 families were involved, the whole commission, and he had to go with the flow. The money was rolling in. It had got to a point where it was so big, even Paul couldn't control it. It was because of his involvement in construction, with his carefully calibrated division of spoils, that Sammy himself came close to being the object of a sanctioned Cosa Nostra hit. Sammy and Eddie Garofalo, in partnership with Joe Madonia, the original owner of Ace Partitions, continued to get most of their drywall subcontracts from Louis DeBono, a soldier in the crew of the Gambino family capo, Pat Conti. When DeBono fell some $200,000 in arrears for money due Ace, Sammy dispatched Madonia, an experienced drywall man who was not in the mob, for payment. It never occurred to Sammy that there would be a problem. DeBono, after all, was a friend of ours, like Sammy. Financial trust and honesty were an unquestioned given. But Madonia returned empty-handed. DeBono had claimed that only $50,000 was due, that there had been a lot of back-work charges because he had to bring in other drywall firms to redo inferior performances by Ace Partitions. Madonia said that DeBono produced documents to support his position, and that they were phony. Sammy's back went up at once. If there was one thing he insisted upon, however a job was obtained, it was that the work had to be top of the line. It's clear he's robbing us, Madonia said. Sammy, with Garofalo and Madonia, confronted DeBono in his office. DeBono had a lawyer and an accountant present. Waving assorted papers, he began a labored explanation of how the figure owed Ace Partitions had been arrived at. After listening for a few minutes, barely able to contain himself, Sammy finally ordered Madonia, Garofalo, and DeBono's representatives out of the office. Then, leaning toward DeBono, his voice choking with rage, he said, "Shove the papers up your ass, you fat fuck. What do you think we are, suckers? Don't try robbing me. There's no way you'll ever get to enjoy the money. I'll scatter your brains all over the wall." DeBono shrank back. "Sammy, we'll work this out." Sammy stormed out of the office. DeBono immediately contacted Conti. He told his capo that Sammy had grabbed him and raised his fist, that Sammy had threatened to whack him out. He wanted Conti to go to Paul Castellano and get permission to have Sammy killed. What DeBono said Sammy had done was unpardonable. It was a fundamental tenet of Cosa Nostra that one made member could never raise his hands against another. What's more, said DeBono, the charges Sammy had lodged against him were spurious. Almost at once, Castellano ordered a sit-down. Sammy knew he was in deep trouble. To make matters worse, Pat Conti was a Castellano favorite. When Castellano had sought to bring Dial's poultry products into the supermarket chains, Conti had played a key role in paving the way. Sammy told Frank DeChico that he had let his temper get the best of him. But the truth was, he didn't regret it. Look, DeChico counseled. There was only the two of you. It's your word against his. He says one thing, you say the other. You deny it. Who could prove anything? Maybe you're right, Sammy said. He respected DeChico, and the more he thought about it, the more it seemed to be really good advice. The meeting was scheduled to be held in the back of a Staten Island diner. At least, Sammy figured, nothing would happen there. He took Eddie Garofalo with him. But when they arrived, nobody was around. Then I saw this black Lincoln pull up with tinted windows so you can't see in. Tommy Bellotti steps out of the Lincoln. He tells me the appointment has been changed. It's going to be in the basement of some house. Bring your brother-in-law, Tommy said. Now I can't help wondering if I'm going to come out of this fucking meeting. But I went. And I'm taking Frankie's advice very seriously. Castellano sat at the head of the table. Neil Delacroce was there, as well as the white-haired consigliere Joe N. Gallo. Tommy Bellotti took his place. Frank DeChico was present as well. Sammy saw De Bono sitting next to Conti. This fat fuck, Louis De Bono, Sammy remembered, was down there at the other end, smoking a fucking big cigar and smirking and laughing, like he's saying to me, now I got you by the balls. Paul Castellano addressed Sammy. He said that grave accusations had been made by a friend of ours. Sammy had raised his hands against him. Sammy had threatened to kill him. Was this true? I looked at De Bono, that smirk on his face, waiting to hear me whimper out of this, to dog him, lie. Probably everybody at the table was expecting something like that. I thought to myself, if I do that, nobody's going to know the truth. I said to myself, fuck this. Whether I die or not, I don't give a flying fuck no more. I forgot Frankie's advice. I'm not giving this guy the satisfaction. I went into a fucking frenzy. I just exploded. I stood up and I was yelling, yes, it's true. This fat scumbag was robbing me. He was robbing the family. I explained how he was cheating on all the paperwork. He deserved to die. I said, Paul, give me the permission and I'll kill him right here and now. There was total silence at the table, as if no one could actually believe their ears. Sammy saw Castellano pale, possibly at the thought of a hit taking place right in front of him. Conti's lips appeared to be moving, but no words were coming out. De Bono stared at Sammy, wide-eyed. The smirk had disappeared. Sammy knew that Neil Delacroce was a hoodlum of the old school, but that was about the extent of it. On occasion, he'd gone to Delacroce's club, the Ravenite, on Mulberry Street in Little Italy, to deliver a message from Toto. Once or twice he had stayed on to play pinochle with the underboss. Suddenly, his face flushed with anger, Delacroce pointed towards Sammy and bellowed, here's a guy who's designing his death right now. But I want to tell you one thing. I listened, and he's speaking the fucking truth. He ain't lying, and he could lie and try and get out of this. Maybe he did wrong, but he's right. The other one is a disgrace to our life. Finally, Castellano, having recovered from his initial astonishment at Sammy's outburst, spoke up. All right, let's take it easy. In the face-saving discussion that followed, it was decided that both sides were equally guilty of wrongdoing. It was put down as a misunderstanding all around. Sammy and De Bono were to end their business relationship. They were to shake hands, and that would be it. When Castellano demanded Sammy's promise that he would obey this edict, Sammy said, Paul, I give you my word that I'm not going to hurt him. Turning to the shaken De Bono, Castellano said, I want your word too. But before De Bono could reply, Sammy broke in, Paul, I don't think there's any worry about him hurting me. News of what had occurred spread throughout the family. No one could recall anything remotely like it ever happening before. The word was that Sammy was on the spot, and he had the balls to shoot it out. He didn't even try to hide threatening De Bono. Wise guys laughed at the thought of how Paul Castellano's knees must have been knocking under the table when Sammy wanted to whack out De Bono right in front of him. If there was any lingering doubts that Sammy was both a racketeer and a gangster, they vanished. At the Bergen Hunt and Fish Social Club, an amazed John Gotti heard about it. And
Cheers,
how his
Wix.
mentor, Neil Della Croce, had stood up for Sammy the Bull.
How much this one's actually
Chapter
for
13.
somebody. This is one that I've been asked to do
What's
for
that?
somebody.
I thought we were all one family.
I wasn't sure about putting the headlight on or off, but I think it looks better on, doesn't it?
Court authorization was obtained for a Title III bug to be placed in Castellano's Boat Hill residence.
It pulls it out a bit
It
further
was a
with the light.
daunting prospect. Not only was the mansion in a security-conscious neighborhood of million-dollar-plus homes with no parking allowed on the streets, but it was protected by the most modern alarm system, monitored by a security company minutes away that was run by a private investigator who occasionally replaced Tommy Bellotti as Castellano's driver when Bellotti was otherwise occupied. Beyond this, there were closed-circuit cameras, window sensors, sophisticated locks, watchdogs, and floodlit grounds at night. When Jim Kallstrom told his two top agents on the Special Operations Team, John Kravick and Jim Cantamesa, what their next assignment was going to be, he recalls Kravick wisecracking, "A piece of cake. When do we do it? After we finish wiring the Vatican?" Two other agents on Mao's Gambino squad, assigned to keep tabs on Castellano, would later publish a book in which they described participating in a daring-do midnight break-in to place the bug, complete with blackened faces and black clothes, knocking out the watchdogs with drugged meat, and bypassing the alarm system with only seconds to spare before it went off. In fact, none of this happened. Kallstrom's team spent weeks poring over various scenarios. Blueprints of the mansion were acquired. Informants solved the problem of where to place a bug in a house with 17 rooms. Big Paul usually conducted his mob business gatherings at a long table at one end of his vast kitchen, presumably comforted, as a former butcher, by the proximity of his cherished meat lockers. Finally, a decision was reached that the security obstacles were too great for a break-in. In addition, surveillance showed that there was hardly a predictable moment when someone living in the mansion wasn't there. A far more simple, direct approach, just as daring in its own way, was settled on. The bug was installed in broad daylight one afternoon in mid-March 1983, under the very eyes of Tommy Bellotti. Although many details of precisely how it was done remain classified, the key was Castellano's television set. According to the memoirs of Jules Bonavolanta, who was then chief of the organized crime squads in the FBI's New York office, Castellano's home TV reception began to suffer intermittent interruptions. In frustration, he had Bellotti arrange for a service call. On the day of the appointment, Castellano had to leave for a Wall Street lunch with his financial advisor. He instructed Bellotti to shadow the serviceman everywhere he went. The serviceman was Jim Cantamesa. Down the street, in the guise of a telephone company worker, John Kravick had clamped his way up a pole. The two agents were connected by wireless radio. Bellotti showed Cantamesa all the sets in the mansion. None of them were working properly. At last, they got to one in the kitchen on a shelf by the table. Cantamesa said, pointing to the baseboard. "See all those cobwebs there, sir?" "Yes." They can screw up an electrical connection like you wouldn't believe. Bellotti appeared dumbstruck by this revelation. No shit. So what you gotta do? Cantamesa explained that the first thing to do was to clean out the cobwebs, and next, to examine the wiring in the immediate vicinity to ascertain whether it should be replaced. Producing wires with alligator clips, he said, I can jump over the bad section here like this. Kravik on the pole immediately eliminated the TV signal interference. Unbelievable, Bellotti said. Fucking cobwebs. Who fucking knew? Cantamesa was careful to ask Bellotti if he wanted him to take care of the problem, and Bellotti urged, yeah, do what you gotta do. Once the bug was installed, transmissions from it were relayed by repeaters to a rented room in a warehouse down the hill, where a listening post had been prepared. But all that was being received were broadcasts from an all-news radio station. 2 technicians from Foreign Counterintelligence in Washington were called in. They brought equipment that even Calstum's team was not privy to. For about an hour, they fiddled with dials and exotic antennae, until suddenly, Paul Castellano's voice was heard saying, there any more of that pie left, Gloria? Gloria was Gloria Olanski, the Castellanos' live-in Colombian maid. The book subsequently written by the 2 Gambino squad agents about Castellano hadn't been authorized by Washington, which may have hastened their departure from the Bureau. Among its more sensational revelations was not only that Gloria was Big Paul's mistress, but that the 68-year-old boss was impotent and had arranged for a penile implant to consummate their affair. Intimate details of Castellano's explanation to her of the procedure were published. The rod goes in, he was overheard saying, and then zoop, it works just like a gooseneck lamp. Sammy knew about Gloria. He had been at the mansion one afternoon with Frank Pacheco when Castellano was angrily complaining that FBI agents had approached her to provide information about him. I said, Paul, do you want me to take her out? And he gives me this look. Take Gloria out? He said. And I said, yeah, if you're worried about it, let's get rid of her. Right away, Frankie started kicking me under the table. My leg was black and blue for a week. So I said, Paul, it was just a thought in case you need me. After we left, Frankie said, are you nuts? Why? What's the matter? He loves this girl. He's having an affair with her. He's gone berserk over this fucking broad. I said, Gloria? He said, yeah, Gloria. He'll kill me and he'll kill you before he kills her. Are you crazy or what? I told Frankie, how was I supposed to know? This Gloria was ugly as sin. She was fucking atrocious. She could hardly speak English. I couldn't understand it. I mean, a guy like Paul who's got a ton of money, so get a gorgeous-looking broad, buy a little place for her, keep her tucked away, and do what you want. It don't mean nothing. Who could figure he's going to find the ugliest one in the world and do what he was doing right in front of his own wife under the same roof? Unbelievable. And his wife, Nina, was a wonderful woman, like you would want your mother to be. Years later, when Sammy learned about the penile implant, he wasn't that surprised. He recalled a time when Castellano had gone to Florida with Tommy Bellotti to avoid a subpoena. Castellano would call in every night to a public phone in a Staten Island pharmacy. One day, a son of Castellano's contacted Sammy and told him, my father wants to speak. On the phone, Castellano said he wanted an update on some construction project. Could Sammy fly down just for a day? But the day stretched into 3 days, then 4. Castellano rarely ventured out of the hotel suite he and Bellotti, and now Sammy, were sharing. And Sammy was getting stir-crazy. After Castellano had retired for the night, Sammy said to Bellotti, let's go out for a couple of drinks, not for long. No, Sammy, we can't. What if, God forbid, something happened? I think about this for a second, Sammy remembered, and I said, you're right, Tommy. We're like security, I guess. We gotta stay here. So we're fucked. I open up the yellow pages, and there's all these escort servants. I called one of them up and told them to send over 2 young girls, early 20s, blonde, blue-eyed. Tommy's a little leery, but I said we're in our part of the suite. How's Paul going to know? Sure enough, these 2 hookers come in, knockouts, really nice, sharp. When we're finished, I start thinking about Paul. Listen, I said to the girl I was with, my uncle's in the next room. I want you to knock on the door. Don't ask him no questions. Don't ask for no money. Don't ask him nothing. Just go in there and do whatever he wants you to do. I think she wanted $50, so I gave her $100 to make sure everything goes right. Now Tommy's in a panic. What if Paul takes offense? What if he does this, and what if he does that? I said, I'll take the weight. If he don't want her, he'll throw her out. He wants to get mad, he'll get mad at me because I did it. This girl knocks on the door. It opens. She says, all of a sudden, I see his hand come out and grab her by the wrist, and she goes in. I figured, so far so good. He didn't throw her out. About 30 minutes pass before she comes out. How'd it go, I asked. Did he say anything? No, he just took my arm and went back in bed and laid down. But he never got it up. I did everything I could. I guess he wasn't too excited. Then he said, you can leave. I said, that's it? That's it, she said. Now I'm thinking, my God, I'm in trouble. I'm going to get my ass chewed out big time for sending in a hooker. The weird part was that when we all went down for breakfast in the morning, Paul never said one fucking word. It was like it didn't happen. Afterwards, Tommy gave me a little hint that maybe Paul had a problem and to forget it. Personally, I thought it was nauseating for the agents to put all that stuff in their book. Paul was long gone by then, but it was humiliating to the man's memory. Although Paul Castellano had run the most powerful Cosa Nostra family in the nation for 7 years, since 1976, he'd remained practically unknown to the public at large and seemingly immune to prosecution. But now the layers of insulation he'd enjoyed were beginning to fray. The Gambino squad agents made no attempt to hide their physical surveillance. Then, quite apart from the squad, just as Kallstrom's team was looking at various ways to bug Castellano's house, a combined federal, state, and city task force was zeroing in on a huge auto theft ring headed up by a family soldier named Roy DeMeo. DeMeo's capo was Nino Gatti, in whose house Castellano had been officially confirmed as the new family boss, while Della Croce settled for his old role as underboss. Sammy knew DeMeo very well. Roy was a tremendous earner, and he was as dangerous as you could get, he said. Paul used him for a lot of hits, on and off the record. I was in a diner with him once talking about stolen cars. There was a whole bunch of senior citizens eating in there, minding their own business. All of a sudden, for no reason at all, right in the middle of our conversation, he says that with a couple of 9mm, he could blow them all away before they knew what was happening. I remember thinking, I've killed people myself, but a room full of senior citizens? What kind of insanity is this? During one 9-month period, DeMeo's ring shipped 351 stolen vehicles to the Middle East, principally to Kuwait, at an average profit per car of $5,000. Castellano, of course, knew few of the details of how the ring operated, or about the 25 murders associated with it. Stealing cars was beneath him, but he didn't turn his back on the money. DeMeo handed over roughly $20,000 a week to his capo, Gaggi, who every Sunday would then deliver an indeterminate amount of cash, wads of $100 bills, to Tote Hill. Although the Gambino squad was after much bigger game, this was just the kind of RICO case that G. Robert Blakey had envisioned. DeMeo, a participating member of a criminal enterprise, and Castellano, the overall head of that enterprise, who had reaped illicit proceeds from a pattern of racketeering, whether or not he was personally involved in it. Castellano was perfectly aware of the pitfalls. To make matters worse, from his standpoint, DeMeo had also become a heavy dealer and user of cocaine. His behavior was increasingly erratic. This made him even more dangerous. Then Frankie DeChico told me that Paul had ordered a hit on Roy. Frankie's crew was given the contract. They couldn't get to him, so Frankie used two guys who were with Roy. He told them that this was what the boss wanted, and they did it. I understood why Frankie tipped me when I was up seeing Paul a day or two afterwards. He had me sit down. That girl, Gloria, got me coffee, and Paul threw down a newspaper in front of me. It was open to a page. Here, read this, he said, walking all around. The story was about Roy DeMeo being found in the trunk of a car. What do you think of that? He said. He don't know that I know that he gave the order. He's being cheeky. He wants to see my feelings. Like maybe I would say, hey, Roy was my best friend. I'm going to get even with whoever the fuck did this. He's trying to gauge my reaction. So what I did as soon as I got done reading the article, I looked at him and said, Paul, if you're mad, I'm mad. If you ain't mad, I said, putting the paper aside, I don't give a fuck. He looked at me and said, oh, all right. You want something else with the coffee? Those were his exact words. And it was over and done with. I guess he was happy with that answer. Far more serious clouds hovered on Castellano's horizon. In August 1983, about 6 months after DeMeo's murder, 4 months after Big Paul's kitchen was bugged, the Gambino squad arrested Angelo Ruggiero, Gene Gotti, John Carneglia, and 8 other men associated with the Bergen crew for heroin racketeering. For the first time, it was revealed that much of the evidence was obtained via the bug in Ruggiero's Cedarhurst home. Since death was the family's official position on drug dealing, the garrulous, hulking Ruggiero took the only option available to him. Through John Gotti and Neil Delacroce, he sent messages denying everything. It was a bullshit case, he insisted. The feds didn't really have anything on him. He even went so far as to say that if the FBI had tapes, it wasn't his voice on them. It was all a sham, a frame. He wasn't into drugs. The feds were just trying to tie him in with his late brother, Sal. Paul Castellano elected to proceed with some caution. This case involved not 1 or 2 renegade soldiers, but for all practical purposes, the entire Bergen crew, one of the family's key work crews, with the notable exception, so far, of its acting capo,
I know, mate. I know. I haven't got a phone number now. I was gonna go and get the shop and get a shitty SIM card. I should have done. Hello.
That's probably totally weird. And I mentioned EPB's name. I'm like,
Yeah, dude, I'm in a conversation with like some old lady. I'm like, hey, do you know EPB? She's like, what the fuck you talking about? What the fuck you talking about? I'm like, you know EPB, the fucking YouTube streamer? She's like, nope, don't know him. I'm like, fuck you. You don't know what you're missing. You don't know what you're missing. She's like, one of the 2 years or... Dude, I got like... I got 18. Nice. Yeah, I'm giving a beer bug. Thanks to Hippie. Thank you, Hippie. Thank you. Yeah. All I do is let you know, you know me,
Right, I'm going to have a cigarette before I go back in, but I'm going back in when next to be more white.
What was that shooting triple there? I forgot it.
And then I need to do the 3 flag.
John Gotti. He could break John down to a soldier on the grounds that he'd failed to control the crew and disband what was left of it. But there was Neil Delacroce to consider.
Oh, I'm ready.
Delacroce hadn't displayed the
Probably.
slightest sign
I
of
just got
disloyalty to the precepts of Cosa Nostra. Still, there was a lingering uncertainty in Castellano's head about
We're
Delacroce.
not left here.
As boss and underboss, their relationship was unusual. They had little in common. If Paul was into white-collar organized crime, Neil was his blue-collar hoodlum equivalent. The truth was that Paul had accepted Neil as underboss simply to smooth over a potentially tense confrontation that might have prevented his coronation as boss. He knew that Delacroce was an immensely popular figure in the family, and that not only was John Gotti extremely close to him, but Ruggiero was his nephew.
This ends side 1 of cassette 6. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.
Castellano never hesitated to employ violence when it served his immediate purpose. He
Remember
was
that
not,
sharp knife,
however, as Sammy said, an instinctive gangster. To back the Bergen crew into a corner was to invite civil war. Castellano had seen how persistent blood-soaked warfare in the Colombo family, beginning with the assassination of Joe Colombo and continuing on through the lengthy imprisonment of Carmine Persico, was tearing that family apart. At this stage of his life, it was the last thing Castellano desired. He loved the money being boss brought him, but he began to detest the job itself. And of course, he had no idea that the electronic surveillance of Ruggiero had led to the bug in his own residence. Delacroce, playing for time on behalf of his nephew as well as Gotti, provided Paul with a face-saving way out. Look, Neil told him, sooner or later the government's got to turn over them tapes. Let's see what's on them. Then the Gambino squad's Bruce Mao learned that Ruggiero had already started playing another high-stakes card. At the request of the FBI's Colombo squad, Jim Kallstrom's team had bugged a table in a Brooklyn restaurant where the family's acting boss, in the absence of Persico, Gennaro Jerry Lang Langella, and one of his top captains, Dominic Donnie Shax Montemarano, regularly met. One memorable night, Angelo Ruggiero joined them. Lang and Shax were furious about $50,000 due them in extortion money on a construction project, which Paul Castellano had convinced the Cosa Nostra Commission to nullify. Ruggiero seized the moment. He said his uncle was disgusted with Castellano's construction interest. I can't believe it, he quoted Delacroce as saying. That's all he talks about. Money, money, money. Big trouble was brewing between his uncle and Castellano, said Ruggiero. I think Paul's looking to whack Neil. He said that he had told Delacroce, Why don't
Like
you
the
just
way
do
it
it and
was
forget about it?
when you done the light.
Go in and fucking
The more
smoke.
behind the light.
Jerry Lang interjected to Donnie Shacks. What did I
I
say,
can just go
Donnie,
over it
after the
again because I
holidays?
did think
What
that, so
happened?
I should have done
That
that first
Neil and
before I
Don
done
Gotti
that.
will die. It's getting worse and worse, too, Ruggiero said bitterly.
Just pulls it
Paul
out a wee
don't
bit
know
more.
what it's like to be on the street without a quarter in your
Tap the
pocket.
dicks.
He ain't gonna get away with it no more, Lang said. I tell you, Ange, somebody's gonna... Before Lang could finish, Ruggiero said, I know. Believe me, Jerry, I know. Listening to this, Bruce Mao remarked to Kallstrom, I don't think we're the only problem Paul has to worry about. I liked Angelo, Sammy said. He had a lot of balls. Not too much in the brains department, but he seemed then like an upfront guy. He caused a lot of people a lot of heartaches with his mistakes, his actions, everything he was doing. He was crude, but he was funny with his crudeness. He could make you laugh. So I kind of liked him. I didn't know till later that the bug on him gave the government the okay, the right legally, to bug Paul's house. It was Angie's big mouth. I mean, he's caught on tape all over the fucking place. His tapes, the tape with Jerry Lang and Donnie Shacks, you name it, and Angie's on tape. And always talking about stuff that he ain't supposed to be even mentioning to nobody. We find out about the tapes on Angie when he was arrested, and they eventually would become a major fucking problem. Ultimately, people would say these tapes and what was on them probably led to Paul's downfall. But what really led to it was also a lot of things he was doing that people in the family were against. And when the time came, when it came down to the wire, this was why me and Frankie DeChico and the other guys went along with it. Right then, though, Angie's tapes had nothing to do with me whatsoever. I was never at Angie's house. I'm not on any of his tapes in any way, shape, or form. That was all Angie's problem, John Gotti's problem, and Paul. Meanwhile, the tapes from the bug near Castellano's kitchen table kept rolling, slowly building court-admissible evidence that he was indeed the chairman and chief executive officer of a huge criminal enterprise. Among those in attendance at the table were his consigliere, Joe Engallo, Tommy Gambino, an aging trusted capo, Joe Piney Armone, James Jimmy Brown Fila, the porno king, Robert DeBee DiBernardo, as always, Tommy Bellotti, occasionally Frank DeChico, along with a crafty associate in his crew, Joe the German Watts, whose father was actually a Welshman, and Joe Butch Corral, a capo who used the freezers of a Mulberry Street restaurant he owned to store cash deposits and withdrawals for his loan sharking. Corral was of special interest to both Castellano and the Gambino squad. The mother-in-law of one of Corral's soldiers was a deputy clerk in the federal court for the Southern District of New York, which included Manhattan. The bug revealed that she was regularly passing on inside information to Corral on what investigations were underway, what indictments were being presented to grand juries. This was how Big Paul, to his dismay, learned in early 1984 that despite the murder of Roy DeMeo, he was going to be charged in the Southern District along with 9 surviving members of DeMeo's ring on 78 counts of car theft, 25 killings, cocaine dealing, extortion, prostitution, and racketeering. Castellano's lawyers assured him that the charges he faced were a reach that no jury would buy, an opinion Bruce Mao's agents privately shared. But as Mao reminded them, it's not our call. Mao was just happy that the Title III court applications he had made to bug Ruggiero, Castellano, and others were not in Manhattan, but in the Eastern District of New York, which embraced Brooklyn and Queens. And there had been no leaks. Singularly absent on any of the tapes that recorded the gatherings around Castellano's kitchen table was Neil Delacroce. And he was never spotted in any of the cars entering and exiting the Tote Hill mansion. nor was the voice of Sammy Gravano ever heard. Although Mao was unaware of it at the time, Castellano preferred to hash over the construction project so dear to his heart during one-on-one meetings that did not take place at the kitchen table. Each of these meetings was usually with Robert DiBernardo, who in addition to his porno responsibilities, was Paul's emissary to Local 282 of the Teamsters. With Frank DeChico, with a sallow little family soldier named Funzi Mosca, who served as Castellano's construction bagman and his expert on union jurisdiction, and with Sammy. Still, the constant physical surveillance finally landed Sammy on Mao's Gambino family chart. Ever cautious, Sammy had made it a point to go to Toad Hill in a car registered to Gem Steel. Neither Joe Polito, Gem's president, nor Mario Mastro Marino, his chief engineer, the assumed occupants of the car, appeared to be mobbed up. Then one afternoon, a car with New Jersey plates was noted. A check showed it to be registered to a horse farm. The owner of the farm was a Deborah Gravano. A further check showed that she was married to Salvatore Gravano, a maid member in Toto Aurello's crew. Years ago, he'd been acquitted in a double homicide case. He was currently embroiled in a tax evasion case that involved the sale of a Brooklyn disco. That was it. He didn't seem very important. Whenever the topic of construction came up in Castellano's kitchen, it concerned reported disputes between families, which one was entitled to what on shared projects. Paul would promptly table the discussion for further review in what were called mini-commission meetings outside the mansion, which required the attendance of the bosses involved. Sammy was present at one of them, where he got his first close-up look at Vincent the Chin Gigante in action. Although Fat Tony Salerno, almost a caricature of an old line hoodlum with his cap and baggy pants, his teeth invariably clenching the stub of a cigar, his undershirt peeking above his unbuttoned collar, was listed on FBI charts and reported in the press as the boss of the Genovese family. Gigante was the real power. Family members were under strict orders never to breathe his name in passing on his wishes. They were simply to point to their own chins when referring to him. Some 3 decades earlier, he gained fame in a bungled attempt to assassinate Frank Costello on the orders of Vito Genovese. Now, residing in his aged mother's Greenwich Village apartment, he had achieved even greater notoriety in the tabloids for wandering around neighborhood streets unwashed and unshaven, attired in pajamas, a tattered robe and worn slippers, muttering incomprehensibly to himself. Time after time, psychiatrists, both his own and court-appointed, had persuaded judges that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. As an ex-prize fighter, they said, he'd taken too many punches to the head. They called them mini-commission meetings, Sammy said, because they weren't really to talk about Cosa Nostra. It was to talk about the construction business. Paul loved them because in his heart, he was a businessman. There was a million bullshit problems in construction all the time. What contractor should get the bid on the concrete? Your guy got it last time out, we should get it now. How big were the Teamsters in this one, the laborers in that one? Where's the jurisdiction? Who got in on the ground floor? Paul ate that up. He loved that shit. Paul was smart as they come. The Chin was more of a gangster, but I would say he was right up there with Paul. And he was pissed. He said that commission meetings should be just about family business, not the construction business or any other business. These things should be handled by captains and never even reach the commission level and have to be straightened out by bosses. The Chin said, what are we doing at these fucking meetings? Sitting around talking about bullshit? Talking about construction? Does that require this? What if we were taking a surveillance? We're going to end up paying the piper for these meetings. He said that a commission meeting is meant to take a life or to save a life, to prevent a war between one family and another, to set overall policy, It wasn't to resolve whether you should pay this guy $5,000 because he belongs to that union. That was for the captains to decide, not the bosses. The Chin made some good points. I had to agree. He didn't sound so crazy to me. After his indictment in connection with DeMeo's murderous auto theft ring, Paul Castellano grew visibly more tense and withdrawn. It didn't seem like he was guilty, Sammy said, but that doesn't mean nothing. That don't mean you're going to win the case, because you're not guilty. They got him hornswoggled into a lot of things that he didn't know about, but he's got a problem. He did take the money, and he was using Roy for hits all over the place. For Sammy, Castellano's efforts to find out what was on the Ruggiero tapes remained a matter that did not concern him. Still, other incidents were causing him to take a second look at the family boss. There's this Eddie Garofalo, Sammy said. He's in demolition work and also construction. He gets a major job and he wants it non-union. So he comes to me and I hook him up with Louis Giardino and Local 23, which is the Mason tenders. Now Garofalo is going to make a couple of $100,000 out of this. I told him that he has to kick back $120. He agrees. When the first 40 comes in, I told Giardino, Paul gets the whole 40. He's the boss. Let him get paid first. And that's what we do. The next 40 comes in and I think, what the hell? We use the union. It's our union. And Louis is a friend of ours. Let him do what he's got to do with the union. I don't take a penny. I can wait. That whole 40 to Louis and the union. Before I know it, the job's almost done. I still don't have the last payment, my 40. One day I went to Eddie and said, when are you coming up with the fucking 40? He said, I came up with it last week, Sammy. I gave it to Louis Giardino. I was taken aback, but I don't show any reaction. I sent for Giardino and I said, Eddie gave you $40,000 last week? And he said, yeah, that's right. Well, what did you do with it? That's my fucking 40. He said, I gave it to Paul. You gave it to Paul? Oh, all right. No problem. I'll get it off Paul. So I go up to Paul's house. Frankie DeChico's there. I'll never forget this. I went in and it's, hey, Paul, hi, Frankie, how's it going, buddy? Then I said, Paul, I believe Louis Giardino gave you 40 last week. That was mine. You were paid, and the union was paid. All of a sudden, he whispers, and he looked up at the ceiling like there were 100 bugs in it. He said, don't bring it up to me anymore. I'll bring it up to you. There wasn't anything more I could say. There was some talk about this and that. When I leave the house, Frankie's with me. He's laughing. Gee, Sammy, he said, you're so fucking dumb. What the fuck you talking about, dumb? I said. He said, this guy gets his hands on money. He never gives it back. He's never bringing up that 40 again. I said, are you nuts, Frankie? He's got $1 trillion. I gave him his end first. I paid the union second. I waited for my end. You mean to tell me he's keeping my end? Frankie said, I tell you what, a steak dinner, he never brings it up. We shook hands. It's a bet.
Sounds like them by
Well, I bought Frankie the steak dinner. I couldn't believe it. That bum kept the 40,000. He never brought it up. Never said nothing. It was as if Castellano, beset by the unrest brewing in his own family, was seeking allies in other families. We had this captain up in Connecticut, Sammy said. I think his name was Frank Piccolo. The Genovese people hated him because he was their competition. They, Chin, come up with some concocted story about how he was a thorn in their side, a real pain in the ass. That's all I heard. They want permission from Paul to kill him, and he gives it, and they do kill him. For being a thorn in their side and a pain in the ass? He was doing his job for our family. He was doing what he was supposed to do. And Paul gave him up, a captain in our family, in 2 seconds, against every Cosa Nostra rule. It was a big disgrace for the family, a real black eye. You give him up in 5 minutes to the Genovese family? Would you want your father giving you up like that? That was a bad, bad move Paul made, a real bad move. You want to know your boss is going to fight for you, tooth and nail. But now you're not so sure anymore. Probably he thought it was a good move business-wise or racketeering-wise. But gangsters don't think like that. The Chin would never do that. Nobody fucks with him. He ran a tight ship, and he ain't interested in the money. He already had a ton of money. His biggest problem was where to hide it. He didn't take money from most of his captains. I guess he didn't want some captain to flip and say, I've been giving him money. But it was clear as a bell that he was the boss. So why was he doing his nut act? Sometimes I would think that he really was crazy and took medication when he had to be sane. People told me he could have dirt on him that got so dirty it wasn't like dirt, but turned kind of crusty white. Maybe our life was the only life he had. Maybe he enjoyed driving the feds nuts, which he was. Worse yet, it became apparent to Sammy, DeChico, and others that Big Paul was lining his pockets with proceeds that should have been shared with members of the Gambino family. He gave away the Bread Association, which was ours, to the Colombo family, Sammy said. I don't know what he got on that, and he started being real greedy with the concrete. What he did was to hook up with Vinny DiNapoli of the Genovese family. Vinny's a tremendously smart guy and a good mover in construction. And he lets Vinny have Biff Halloran to handle. Halloran's got Transit Mix and Certified Industries, 2 of the biggest concrete suppliers in the city. We used to control Halloran, and we hear Vinny is bringing suitcases of money to Paul. I remember one day Frankie DeChico saying to me, hey Sammy, what's this? Why don't he stick somebody in our family in the middle of this thing? We got soldiers who are broke. And he got his son-in-law to go partners with Nicoletta of S&A, who's also with Vinny. So when we're dictating to the concrete club, a lot of the jobs, most of them, went to S&A. Now, I ain't a captain yet, but I was a made guy. I own a business. I'm getting small jobs. But these guys Paul made deals with are getting the bulk of everything. So that's another big mistake Paul is making. We can see he's not doing this for our family. He's doing it for his personal family, for his personal pocket. This is when the grumbling, so to speak, really starts with us, and we're talking to one another. I don't know why Paul thought that we would never talk to each other. John Gotti, who's got his own thing with Paul about Angie's tapes, picks this up, of course. At a pre-Christmas gathering at Tote Hill in 1984, Sammy arrived with the requisite envelope of money. He stayed for a short while and then said he had to leave. Paul asked him where he was going. I want to stop by the Ravenite and pay my respects to Neil. What are you going down there for? You're on my side. Sammy looked at Castellano and said, what side? I thought we're all one family. Neil's our underboss. Chapter 14. We talked about sending a crew right into Paul's house. Across America, 1985 was not a vintage year for Cosa Nostra. Family bosses in Cleveland, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Kansas City were convicted and received lengthy sentences for conspiring to skim vast sums of cash from the Las Vegas casinos that they controlled through the use of Teamster pension funds. For all practical purposes, the mob was through in the City of Dreams. The hierarchy of the Patriarca family, which operated out of Boston and Providence, was convicted on multiple RICO counts ranging from loan sharking to murder. An all-out federal assault was launched against the Philadelphia family, which would lead to life in prison for its violent boss, Nicky Scarpo. In New Orleans, the family had never recovered from the conviction for trying to bribe a federal judge of the previously untouchable Carlos Marcello, who was often rumored to have been involved in an assassination plot against President John F. Kennedy. In Tampa, Buffalo, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, San Jose, the families were wobbling on their last legs. And in New York, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani announced the ultimate RICO racketeering case against Cosa Nostra, charging that the commission itself was a criminal enterprise. All 5 local bosses or acting bosses would be indicted. Among them, the Colombo acting boss, Jerry Langella, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, the Lucchese boss, Phil Rusty Restelli, the Bonanno boss, the Genovese boss, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the Colombo boss, Carmine Persico, and Paul Castellano. Only Chin Gigante escaped unscathed. While he was the true power in his family, Salerno was the ostensible boss. Gigante had never been caught on tape. No one in the family had incriminated him by name on tape. And the reality was that prosecutors also faced the uninviting prospect of trying to prove that he possessed the mental competence to stand trial. The bail set for Castellano, who was described as the de facto head of the commission, was the highest for any of the defendants, $4 million. After a night in jail, he had no trouble meeting. Now Paul learned for the first time that his home had been bugged, and that the Ruggiero tapes were the legal basis for it.
That look better now.
Give me those tapes.
Okay.
Big Paul
Come on over the
demanded of
top,
Della
push
Croce
it back
in
a bit.
June 1985.
I'm the
Transcripts weren't good enough. It was an article of faith among wise guys that at worst the government doctored them and at best made transcribing errors.
Oh, that's almost pretty.
But the dynamics of the play had dramatically changed. Della Croce was terminally ill with inoperable cancer. His scheduled hospital stays for treatment allowed Kallstrom's team to place a bug in his Staten Island home that recorded the conversation. Della Croce tried to placate Big Paul, saying that there were many personally embarrassing moments on the tapes that Angie did not want anyone to hear. Tell him, Castellano snapped back, not to worry about that, all right? Don't worry. I don't want these tapes in order to get the proof I need to kill him. I want these tapes because it's part of my case. He said his lawyers were trying to suppress the introduction of his own tapes in the commission trial. That was why he had to have them. Let me talk to him, Della Croce said. His voice sounded weary. In ensuing sessions between Ruggiero, Gotti, and Della Croce, Ruggiero remained adamant about not giving up the tapes. He accused his uncle of betrayal for even entertaining the thought. He told his lawyers he would kill them if they gave up the tapes. Listening to this, Bruce Mao could appreciate Ruggiero's dilemma. He was truly between a rock and a hard place. Besides narcotics trafficking, Ruggiero had prattled on about commission meetings to one of his heroin dealers who was not then a made member. If that ever got out, nothing could save him. You don't understand, Cosa Nostra, Della Croce said, as though addressing a recalcitrant child. Gotti, anxious to maintain his standing with Neil, chimed in, Ange, what does Cosa Nostra mean? Before Ruggiero could reply, Della Croce said, Cosa Nostra means that the boss is your boss. If Ruggiero didn't give up the tapes, he warned, the likely outcome would be war in the family. Both Gotti and Ruggiero protested that that was the last thing they wanted. The tone was quite different afterward at Gotti's club, which the FBI had finally decided to bug. Fuck Paul, John Gotti told Angela. We heard about this, Sammy said. How Angie, never face-to-face, always through Neil, was telling Paul to go fuck himself. I don't think Neil had any great love for Paul. But first of all, Paul was the boss. You can't kill the boss. That's the rule. And Neil was for our life. I don't think if he lived, he would have let Angelo get killed. He would have probably put him on a shelf somewhere and appeased Paul that way. If he let Paul kill him, there would have been a war. I think he felt Paul's the boss, so let's fess up. This is the truth. This is what happened. Here are the tapes. Then, if Paul followed up and said, well, I want him dead, Neil would have fought tooth and nail to save him. And if he couldn't, who knows what the fuck would have happened. But that's all hypothetical. I'm just guessing. I don't think John really gave a fuck about Angelo or the tapes. I think he was looking to create a situation to capitalize on our other grievances about Paul. I think John did give a fuck when Neil died, which we all knew would happen sooner or later. He's looking ahead, and he sees trouble. Even if he isn't killed himself, all of John's sights on being Mr. Big Shot are crippled. Paul is already talking about when Neil dies, he's going to close down the Ravenite. He's going to break John down to a soldier, stick him somewhere in a crew, maybe under Joe Butch, and treat him like a fucking hard-on. Without even being dead, he's finished. Then there is the possibility they would move on John and kill him. I mean, if tapes come out about drugs, even though it's a bullshit rule, what are you going to say? I lied? That I was kidding on the fucking tapes? Hey, it's your voices. Maybe it's not John's, but all of his guys, including his brother, Angie, and everybody. So he could be finished all around, no question about it. A lot of people would jump on the bandwagon with this stuff. Plenty of guys really disliked John. It was common knowledge that Tony Ducks hated him. On the other hand, he did have a large crew, a work crew, and you know you couldn't just disregard that. Only one thing was certain. John wasn't going nowhere without Frankie DeChico and me. While this imbroglio raged on, Sammy, that summer of 1985, had more immediate concerns. He was in the middle of the Plaza Suite tax evasion case and was bracing himself for a long sentence. Everyone, including his own lawyer, thought he was going to be convicted. By then, he had a new headquarters for his construction consulting company, S&G, a two-story building on Stillwell Avenue between Bensonhurst and Coney Island. It was in his wife's name. In fact, she had bought it, and he bore the expense of remodeling it. Deborah had been successfully dabbling in real estate, and she banked everything she made. And she boasted a winning ticket in the New York State Weekly Lottery. Sammy had seen her penciling in the numbers on a lottery slip and couldn't resist needling her about it. That's only for suckers, he said. What are the odds? 13 million to 1? The next night, when he arrived home, she waved the ticket at him. Say hello to a sucker, she said. It was worth $800,000. Sammy held 25% of the stock in S&G. The other 75% was in Deborah's name for her and the children. She also purchased the home where they now resided, in a middle-class neighborhood in mid-Staten Island, convenient to the expressway that led to the Verrazano Bridge in Brooklyn. Once again, Sammy was responsible for the renovations, which turned out to be a massive reconstruction. On a corner plot, it was a rundown wooden frame house. By the time Sammy was finished, it was brick with marble floors, the original 2,300 square feet nearly doubled, with an in-ground pool in the backyard, all surrounded by a 16-foot-high wall. The union construction crews were quite cooperative. One day in late September 1985, Robert DiBernardo brought a message to Sammy. Could he go to Queens? Angelo and John would like to see him. So I went, Sammy said. But only Angie was there. He said, Sammy, we're going to make a move. I'm making a move on Paul. Are you with me? I remember him hitting himself on the chest and saying, I'm going to blow this fucking motherfucker away. I'm listening, not saying anything. Then I said, "And let me ask you a couple of questions. Where's John?" "He's with me, Sam. But he thought it was best for me and you to talk first." So already John was playing the big shot. I said, "Where's Frank DeChico on this?" "We're going to get to Frankie, and Frankie's going to be with us, you'll see." "So right this minute, Frankie don't know what you're telling me?" "No." I said, "Angie, I'm not going to tell you what my position is, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm getting in my car, and I'm going to see Frankie myself and tell him about this meeting we're having now. You got any problem with that?" "No, no. Go ahead and tell him." "Come on, Sammy, I love you and Frankie. I need you. You know I'm dead without you." I went over to Frankie's house and rang the bell. For me, Frankie's an awesome guy. His crew is double mine, Toto's, and everybody loves him. He's about 6 foot, big, tough, muscular, nose a little smashed over to one side. His father's a made guy. His Uncle George right now is a captain. Another uncle's not made, but a street guy nonetheless. I said, "Frankie, come on out, let's take a walk. I gotta have a long talk with you." And I tell him what's going on, what Angie said. "All right, Sammy, what do you think?" he said. I said, "Frankie, what do I think? That's why I'm here. What do you think? What do we think together? I mean, as boss, Paul's selling the family out." Both Sammy and DeChico were acutely aware that what was being suggested was practically unheard of. There hadn't been an unsanctioned hit on a family boss in New York since Vito Genovese's botched murder attempt against Frank Costello nearly 30 years ago. I said, "I guess the point is, should we let John and Angie fight it out with Paul? Should we stay on the sidelines, just sit back, or should we join him?" We bounced everything off each other for 2-3 hours, whatever it was, and we concluded that we're not laid-back guys. We were really going to oppose this, or we're going to approve it. And if we approve it, we would join in. Then Frankie said, "Neil's not long for this world, and Paul may go up on these cases he has. If he does, the word is he's making Tommy Gambino the acting boss and Tommy Bellotti the underboss." I had heard some of this already, and it made me sick. Tommy Gambino was a fucking dressmaker. I went one time to the garment district to see him about something, and there he was on his knees, pinning the hem on some model. "How does that look to you, Sammy?" he said. "Isn't it beautiful?" And Tommy Bellotti's a fucking abusive gorilla. We're going to have to answer to them. They're going to run our family. We keep talking, and finally we decide we'll back the move, be part of it. Then I told Frank, "The only thing I want is that you become the boss after this is over." That's when Frankie said, "John's fucking ego is too big. I could be his underboss, but he couldn't be mine. Look, he's got balls, he's got brains, he's got charisma. If we can control him to stop the gambling and all his flamboyant bullshit, he could be a good boss. Sammy, I'll tell you what, we'll give him a shot. Let him be the boss. If it don't work out within a year, me and you, we'll kill him. I'll become the boss, and you'll be my underboss, and we'll run the family right. Let's give him the shot." I said, "Frankie, if that's the way you feel, that's good enough for me." And we shook hands on it. The next day, we sent for Angie, both of us, to come to Frankie's club. We told him, "We're with you. We need a series of meetings. And when you come down again, come with John. He's no big shot here. If John don't come down to the next meeting, we retract this. We won't be with you. We'll be against you if you go ahead and make the hit." John is at the next meeting. Angelo's there. I'm there. Frankie. DeB is there too. No phones are being used. DeB is our messenger back and forth, the in-between guy. He's giving us information about Paul. Besides the porno stuff, DeBee is Paul's main guy with the Teamsters, Local 282. He's involved in some of these conversations in the beginning stages. Then we exclude him because he's not a hit guy. He's an earner, but he's got no crew, no strength and power. We asked John what about the old-timers, and John says he spoke with Joe Piney, Joe Armon, our captain, who's very respected in the family. He handles the restaurant unions for Paul, the entertainment business, stuff like that. John says he's on the bandwagon, and he says Joe Piney has talked to Joe Gallo, Paul's consigliere. Joe Gallo is not on the bandwagon. He don't oppose it. If we do it, he'll go along. He's not going to be part of it. In case it backfires, he's in the clear. Okay, he wants to be a fox. Let him. Me and Frankie want to make sure that Joe Piney said what John said he said about Joe Gallo. We make an appointment with him to meet us in the basement setup Joe Watts had in his house. We want to hear this out of his mouth, not John's mouth, not Angie's mouth. John and Angie are there. We send Joe Watts outside, and Frankie says to Joe Piney, "You know what you're here for?" Of course. Frankie starts to ask Piney about Gallo when John jumps in, and Frankie said, "Please, John, let me do the talking now." Then he says, "We understand you have Joe Gallo." "Yeah, I spoke to him. He won't be part of the move. His name can't be mentioned. But he will go along if we take over." Sammy remembered how the Chico stared at Joe Piney Armon and asked how sure he was that Gallo wouldn't tip off Paul. The 67-year-old soft-spoken capo with his horn-rimmed glasses replied, "If he betrays us, or he backs up 1 inch, I'll kill him." Well, that was good enough for us. Frankie told him, "We don't need you up front. We need you after the fact, to appease some of the old-timers in the family." The next consideration was the reaction of the other families. Ruggiero reported his meeting at the Casa Storta restaurant with Jerry Lang and Donnie Shax of the Colombos. Even more recently, they had said, "What's John waiting for? To go to his own funeral?" Gotti boasted that he had Joe Messino, the underboss of the Bonanno family, in his hip pocket. The family was still denied a seat on the commission because of its drug trafficking. Chances of reclaiming it would be greatly improved with Castellano out of the way. As for the Lucchese family, Tony Dux Corallo not only hated Castellano, but was immersed in preparing his defense in the forthcoming commission trial. Each suffered a particular humiliation. The New York State Organized Crime Task Force had successfully placed a bug in the Jaguar of Corallo's driver. Corallo had not only chatted in the car about commission meetings, but also made sneering comments about his fellow bosses, including Castellano. One member of the Lucchese family, however, was a force to be reckoned with. Anthony Gaspipe Castle. Gaspipe was tough, Sammy said. But like with everybody, Frankie got along good with Gaspipe, and he sounded him out in a roundabout way how he felt about Paul, and suppose he wasn't the boss no more. Frankie said Gaspipe told him he didn't give a fuck about Paul, so we figured we had tacit approval there. If he ever tried to do anything later, we could throw that in his face. The plotters concluded that the Genovese family was the only one that would not be approached. Big Paul and the Chin went back too far. They were too tight, Sammy said. They had all their big money arrangements. So we decided, fuck Chin. If it comes down to it, we'll go to war with them. And we decided when we take down Paul, we got to take out Tommy Bellotti. They must go together. Everybody agrees to that 100%.
This ends side 2 of cassette 6 of Underboss. Please fast forward to the end before loading cassette 7. Underboss, cassette 7.
That autumn, Castellano's lawyer, James LaRosa, at last obtained the Ruggiero tapes on behalf of his client. Upon learning this, Bruce Mao couldn't help thinking that with Della Croce on the verge of death, it was kill or be killed for John Gotti. There were more meetings. We had to think ahead, Sammy said. Okay, after Paul and Tommy go down, what happens? We could have to hit the mattresses. We could be in the midst of a fucking war. Let's make a list and see who else we have to take out. Who we think is a potential threat. Who's going to be a problem. Maybe there's some Gambino family members who ain't going to be too happy.
I'm going to have a wee
There's
break.
Paul's personal family. Tommy Velotti's brother Joe.
I'll catch you later.
Greaseball hit guys from
Ta-ta.
Sicily could be brought over. We believe there's a real good chance the Chin and the Genovese family will